NaniNovel or RPG Maker MV? Which one should you use to tell your story? And really it comes down to the question is, do you want to use Unity or do you want to use RPG Maker? And there's good reasons to use both of them. And really when it comes down to it, it's going to be your choice, depending on what kind of work you want to put in and things you want to focus on. But I'm going to tell you how I kind of made my decision and the things that went into it. And this is really for people that haven't spent money on either one. I think right now they're both about the same price. RPG Maker MZ, which is the newer one, I think it's around $80. And don't quote me on this, but the last I knew it was. And then NaniNovel I got for about $80, but it was about half price. So they're about the same. So the first thing I want to talk about is documentation. I have to be honest with you, I was absolutely shocked at how little documentation there was on NaniNovel. And really, the more and more I think about it, I can't really blame the programmers for it, the people that are selling NaniNovel, because really, when it comes down to it, RPG Maker, the documentation on how to use it really wasn't done by the people that made RPG Maker. It's a community, and there is tons of tutorials. The forums are full for RPG Maker. Like if you want to know how to do something, you can find the answer very easily by Googling it or going to YouTube. With NaniNovel, there's a reason why I did 2 tutorials on it, because I was just trying to help people out. After hours of trying to figure out how to do the simplest things, I figured I'll make a couple videos to maybe make it a little easier for other people. Because let's be honest, there just isn't a huge community using NaniNovel, which surprises me because it's a really well put together asset. But yeah, if you search on YouTube for NaniNovel, you find very little. In fact, almost all you find is just the creators of the asset. And even though those tutorials aren't bad, I learn by watching and listening, and there's no narration to them. So for me to learn even basics for NaniNovel was really frustrating. And probably the more frustrating thing with it was that the answers to all of this wasn't in, on the website, it wasn't in the guide, it was on Discord. I could have been saved a lot of time just by the first thing that you looked at when you're on the guide was them telling you to go to Discord. Like that's what it should say in the guide. It should say, hey, you can follow this guide if you want to, but if you really want to get answers, go to our Discord server. It should be in huge print at the top of the guide for NaniNovel. But no, it took me days of being frustrated before I finally just happened upon something where it said to go to the Discord server. I joined that, and within minutes I was able to find the answer to something that I'd spent hours on trying to figure out. With RPG Maker though, like literally there are thousands of tutorials. You go to the forums and it's just filled with people looking to help you. So if you're looking for how to use the programs, RPG Maker wins by a landslide on this. Now the other thing that really came down to it for me was familiarity. If you are familiar with Unity and you have any kind of coding skills, NaniNovel might be the right choice for you. For me though, I've been using RPG Maker for years, and I'm not entirely sure that now that I look back why I tried to do this game or tell this story using anything but RPG Maker, because I just know how to use the program. So the next thing you gotta ask yourself is, what are you more familiar with? And if it's neither, then just kind of keep listening to what I got going on and let that help you make your decision. But if you are familiar with RPG Maker, I would suggest sticking with it. And if you're familiar with Unity, probably stick with NaniNovel if you're going to use one of these 2 programs. The next thing that helped me make my decision is deciding what kind of story I wanted to tell. And when it all came down to it, I decided I wanted to make a game. And if you're going to make a game, RPG Maker is definitely the way to go over NaniNovel. Now NaniNovel does have ways that you can integrate other assets in Unity, but that's a whole nother process. With RPG Maker, you already have the ability to do the visual novel part of it, plus you have the ability to make a game. So for me, once I decided I was going to make a game with a visual novel worked in with it, RPG Maker was a no-brainer for me. Now the next part of it, the reason why I went away from RPG Maker and even looked into Unity at all was the stigma. People see that you're making a game in RPG Maker and it just makes them look the other way. Whereas if you make a game in Unity, people are like, okay, yeah, there's some good games that have been made in Unity, like let's give this a try. So ultimately when I release my game, I'm going to have to make some decisions about how I'm going to market it. Am I going to market it as an RPG Maker game? Or am I going to stay away from that? But really the stigma with RPG Maker is more about the default assets. And as you could see, I'm not using any of the default assets at all. In fact, I'm basically just using RPG Maker for the variables and the switch systems and just the behind the scenes type stuff. So ultimately, if I decide to just completely drop RPG Maker out of any marketing, people may be able to figure out that, yeah, that's what I used for it, but it's not going to be obvious. So I'm not really going to worry too much about that. But it is something you have to take into consideration when you're making or telling your story is, do you want to deal with that stigma of RPG Maker? Next thing I had to take into consideration was just the programming. Like RPG Maker, whether it's using switches, using variables, event systems, to me at least, are far superior to NaniNovel. And so much easier to use. So for me, when it came down to it, once I was trying to kind of figure out how I was going to create a relationship system and kind of do story progression, I realized, well, as I was doing NaniNovel, it's like all these things I'm trying to figure out how to do, I can so easily just go back to RPG Maker and do them. It would just be as simple to do it that way. So yeah, so when it comes to like the actual systems and the programming and stuff like that, to me, RPG Maker beats NaniNovel by a landslide. And the last thing I had to take into consideration is how much coding do I want to learn? How much time do I want to spend on that versus making digital assets versus working on storytelling? And for me, I wanted my focus to be on the storytelling and creating digital art. So to learn how to code, and even though it's not a whole lot with NaniNovel, there is some amount of coding that you have to kind of figure out to be able to make it work right. To me, it became very obvious that RPG Maker is what I needed to go back to. And once again, that's not saying there's a whole lot of coding type stuff you have to do with NaniNovel. It's pretty well set up on there, but there's definitely more with that than there is with RPG Maker. So in the end, it became very obvious what I needed to do. I needed to go back to RPG Maker and just focus on telling my story. For you though, maybe your priorities are different. And I'm sure if you get through the learning curve with NaniNovel, to me at least, a much steeper learning curve than there is to RPG Maker, then you know what, there's probably some payoff that I'm not going to get sticking with RPG Maker. And if you're good at figuring things out on your own, go with NaniNovel. But if you need some help, if you need a guiding hand, definitely go with RPG Maker. And that's just my opinion on it. You can do whatever you want. As long as you're focusing on the things that you love doing, that's all that really matters. But anyways, I'm going to go back to working on my story right now. Everybody have a wonderful day and keep creating great things.